The night was heavy, filled with the oppressive weight of an incoming storm. The rain had started to fall in heavy sheets, drumming relentlessly against the pavement. The small rural road stretched out like an empty ribbon, winding through vast, empty fields that were nearly indistinguishable from the dark sky above. The headlights of the lone car were the only break in the monotony of the endless grey landscape. Inside the car, Rebecca, a young woman in her early 30s, sat behind the wheel, her fingers gripping the steering wheel with a quiet intensity. Her eyes were tired, bags under them from long days that seemed to stretch on forever. She had been driving for hours, her thoughts far away, lost in the routine of life. At that moment, her mind wandered between her work, the stress of being a single mother, and the small victories of each day with her son, Lucas. In the back seat, Lucas, a barely one-year-old bundle of joy, slept soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. His little face, soft and innocent, was framed by his plush blanket, his car seat cradling him like the security of a mother's arms. Rebecca stole a glance at him through the rearview mirror, a tender smile tugging at her lips. Despite the long hours and the endless challenges she faced as a mother, moments like these reminded her of the preciousness of the life she was nurturing. Beside her in the front passenger seat sat Max, a German shepherd who had, in many ways, become the protector of their small family. He was scarred, his fur matted from a history of abandonment. Max had once served as a police dog, his life filled with purpose. But after a traumatic injury during his service, he was discarded like an old tool. He had been found in a shelter, broken and alone, and no one seemed to want him, until Rebecca. Rebecca had seen something in Max, something deep in his eyes that resonated with her own pain. He had been through hell and back, just like her, but she believed in second chances. She adopted him, and in doing so gave him a purpose again. Max wasn't just a dog to Rebecca, he was family. He was her companion, her guardian, and a protector of Lucas, who had arrived shortly after Max's adoption. From the moment Lucas had been brought home, Max had been his silent protector. He watched over the crib with unwavering devotion. He sensed danger even before it appeared, and his instincts were sharper than anything Rebecca had ever known. Lucas had no idea just how lucky he was to have Max by his side. But tonight, the night that began like any other, would change their lives forever. The storm had intensified, the rain coming down in torrents that made it nearly impossible to see clearly through the windshield. Rebecca's grip tightened as the tires of the car sloshed against the wet road, and the car swerved dangerously, the steering wheel slipping out of her hands for a brief moment. Max's ears perked up, his eyes darting toward Rebecca. He could sense her unease, could feel the change in the air, the danger creeping ever closer. He moved slightly in his seat, his body tensing, but Rebecca, distracted by the road, didn't notice. In a split second, the world seemed to explode. The car skidded off the slick road, its tires losing their grip. Rebecca screamed, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The car careened off the edge of the road, slamming into the guardrail before flipping over the side. The vehicle turned in the air, spinning uncontrollably, metals screaming as it crumpled under the force of the impact. Max, who had been thrown from his seat, slammed against the interior of the car with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything went dark. The world was a whirl of spinning and noise, the smell of burning rubber and metal filling the air, and then, just as quickly, everything came to a stop. The car lay crumpled and upside down, the interior a maze of twisted metal and shattered glass. The world outside was silent but for the sound of rain. Max was the first to stir. His body ached, each movement sending a sharp pang of pain through his limbs. He forced his eyes open, his vision blurry and disoriented, but his instincts were sharp. His gaze immediately fell on Rebecca. She was unconscious, her head bleeding from the impact, her body limp against the seatbelt that had saved her life. Max's heart raced as he shifted, struggling to regain his footing. His body was battered, but there was no time to waste. His eyes darted to the back seat, and his breath hitched when he saw Lucas. The baby's car seat had been torn free from its base and thrown to the floorboard. Lucas, still strapped in, was vulnerable and cold, his face flushed from the shock of the crash. He cried out, soft whimpers that turned to desperate sobs, the sound cutting through the darkness and rain. Max's protective instincts surged, his body moving despite the pain. He limped toward the back of the car, his legs unsteady beneath him. The storm outside pounded against the vehicle, the cold soaking through, but all Max could focus on was the baby. Lucas's cries were a call Max couldn't ignore. Max's mouth licked the baby's face gently, his rough tongue brushing the small cheeks in an attempt to calm him. He nuzzled Lucas's tiny hands, feeling the coldness in his little fingers. The dog's heart ached with each sob. He could smell the fear, the vulnerability, the helplessness of the child in the wreckage. But Max didn't have time to dwell on what had happened. He had to act. The storm continued to rage outside, a reflection of the chaos that had unfolded inside the car. But amid the darkness, Max's resolve was clear. Max's sharp ears caught a sound in the distance, the sound of an engine, faint at first, but growing steadily closer. A truck. Max lifted his head, his ears straining to hear. He felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of chance. With all the strength he had left, Max forced himself to his feet, his legs trembling under the strain. He limped toward the wrecked car's door, barking loudly, urgently, as though trying to call out to the driver. His bark was raw, desperate, but he could feel it. He was meant to protect these two. He had done it once before, he would do it again. The truck came closer and Max staggered toward the road, stopping only when he saw the headlights of the approaching vehicle. Behind the wheel of the truck was Tom, an older man with weathered features, the lines on his face telling stories of a life lived hard. He had been driving for miles in the rain, the storm worsening by the minute. He hadn't expected to see much on the road, not on a night like this. But the dog, limping and barking, was an unmistakable sign that something was wrong. Tom slowed, his brow furrowed as he watched the dog run in front of him, its tail low and its body trembling. The animal seemed to be urging him to follow, guiding him somewhere. Without thinking, Tom pulled over to the side of the road. His gut told him something was wrong, something urgent. He switched off the engine and followed the dog, his boots crunching through the wet grass. The storm didn't seem to matter now. The rain soaked him through, but he pressed on, drawn by the dog's silent plea for help. Max led Tom to the wreckage, his body pushing forward despite the pain. Tom's eyes widened as he saw the scene unfold before him, the overturned car, the broken windows, the shattered metal. He quickly ran to the baby, finding Lucas cold but alive, still crying in the wreckage. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he bent over Lucas, his hands shaking as he carefully lifted the baby from the wreckage. The child was pale, his body trembling from the cold and shock, his face streaked with tears. Tom's heart thundered in his chest as he quickly checked for signs of injury, but he breathed a sigh of relief when he felt the baby's chest rise. And although weak, Lucas was still alive. Max stood nearby, his body still trembling, his eyes never leaving the baby. He barked softly, as if urging Tom to act faster, to get the baby out of harm's way. "Hang in there, little one," Tom muttered under his breath, as he carefully wrapped Lucas in the warmest layers of his jacket. He cradled the baby to his chest, trying to shield him from the cold and the rain that continued to fall, relentless and unforgiving. Max watched the scene with an intensity that spoke volumes. He stayed close, circling Tom and Lucas, his body low to the ground as if to protect them both from the elements and anything else that might threaten. With one hand holding the baby, Tom reached for his phone with the other. His fingers were slick with rain, but he managed to dial emergency services. His voice was urgent, trembling with a combination of fear and determination. "I need help. There's been a crash. A woman and child. They're hurt. I'm on Highway 17 near the old mill. Please hurry." Tom hung up the phone, his eyes scanning the wreckage. He knew the road was deserted this time of night. Help could take minutes, even hours to arrive. And though the storm was getting worse, he knew he couldn't wait. "Max," Tom said softly, his voice a low, reassuring tone. "Stay with us. Buddy, stay with the baby." Max's ears perked up at the sound of his name. He padded over to Tom and Lucas, positioning himself in a protective circle around them. His eyes never left the road, his posture alert and ready to act if needed. Tom could see the bond between the dog and the baby, a connection that went beyond anything he had seen in his lifetime. It was clear that Max wasn't just a dog, he was more than that. He was a protector, a guardian. A moment passed and then another. The only sounds were the steady patter of the rain and the faint hum of distant sirens. Tom stood there, rooted to the spot, as if hoping that help would come faster by sheer will. And then, in the distance, the red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles flashed through the storm. Relief washed over Tom like a wave, but it was tempered by the reality of what had happened. He had to keep the baby warm. He had to make sure Rebecca was okay. Max gave one last look at the road, then trotted beside Tom, his gaze unwavering. They were in this together. The paramedics arrived quickly, their vehicles skidding to a halt just a few yards from the wreckage. They rushed to the scene, moving with efficiency and calm, their years of training guiding them through the chaos of the moment. Rebecca was carefully removed from the car, her injuries assessed quickly. A gash on her forehead had begun to bleed profusely, but she was alive, unconscious, but alive. The paramedics worked swiftly, securing her in a neck brace before loading her onto a stretcher. Meanwhile, Lucas was examined by another medic. His small body was shivering, his skin pale from the shock and exposure, but his heart was still beating, his lungs still taking in breath. Max stood just outside the cluster of people, his body tense, his eyes locked on the paramedics as they moved around Lucas. His gaze never left the baby, not even for a second. The lead paramedic, a woman in her late 30s, looked at Max. Her eyes softened at the sight of the dog's loyalty, and she spoke gently, almost as if speaking to herself. He's a good dog, he knows who he's protecting. Tom, who had been watching the scene unfold, nodded in agreement. He saved them both. He led me to them. Without him, I don't think I would have found them in time. Max's tail gave a small tentative wag as if he understood the praise, but his focus remained on Lucas. He wasn't finished yet. He wasn't going anywhere until he was sure the baby was safe. The paramedics finished their work, and soon, both Rebecca and Lucas were being transported to the hospital. Max tried to follow them, but one of the paramedics stopped him gently. "Hey, boy, you did your part," she said with a soft smile. "You've earned a rest, we'll take care of them." But Max's protective nature was unyielding. He whimpered softly, his eyes pleading for permission to stay by the baby's side. The paramedic, understanding the bond between the dog and the child, relented. "All right, you can come along, but you'll need to stay in the waiting area." Max's tail wagged, the smallest sign of relief. He followed the stretcher, keeping close, his presence an unspoken promise of safety. Hours later, Rebecca stirred in her hospital bed. The blinding white light above her made her squint, disoriented and confused. Her head throbbed painfully, and her body felt heavy, like it had been pulled through a wrecking machine. But it was the sound that first alerted her to the reality of the situation. The faint sound of a soft whimper. She opened her eyes, blinking against the brightness, and saw Max sitting beside her bed, his gaze locked on her with unwavering loyalty. His fur was wet, his body covered in dirt and rain, but his eyes were as bright and filled with devotion as ever. "Max," Rebecca whispered, her voice hoarse from the crash. "Mac, where's Lucas?" Max tilted his head, his eyes full of reassurance. He moved closer, resting his head gently on her hand, his warm breath a comfort in the cold, sterile hospital room. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. "Lucas? Is he okay?" Max nudged her hand, again as if urging her to calm down. It wasn't until the door to the room opened that Rebecca saw Lucas. He was wrapped in a soft blanket, cradled in the arms of a nurse. The baby's face was pale, but his breathing was steady, his tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythmic cadence of sleep. "Lucas," Rebecca gasped, her voice breaking. "He's okay." The nurse smiled warmly. "He's going to be all right. He's shaken, but we've run some tests, and there are no major injuries. He's a fighter." Rebecca's relief was palpable, and she looked at Max. The tears that had been building up finally spilled over as she reached for her son. "You saved him. You saved both of us." Max wagged his tail, his body lowering into a protective stance as he watched them, content and at peace now that his family was safe. Over the next few days, the storm passed, and so did the worst of the physical injuries. Rebecca's head wound healed, though a small scar would remain as a reminder of the night that could have been their last. Lucas, too, recovered quickly. He had been through more than most babies his age could handle, but his spirit, like his mother's, was strong. And then there was Max. Though he had walked away from the wreckage injured, his wounds were minor compared to the ones he had seen in the past. The bond between him and Rebecca had only deepened through the trauma of that night. Max had given them both something priceless, a second chance. A week later, the town held a small ceremony in Max's honor. News of his bravery had spread quickly, and the townspeople gathered to celebrate the dog who had saved a life and protected a family. Max stood proudly, his tail wagging, surrounded by the people he had grown to trust. Rebecca and Lucas were there too, standing beside Max as he received a Medal of Honor, a small token, but one that symbolized everything Max had done for them. The ceremony was simple, but for Rebecca it was a moment of immense gratitude. "This is for you," she whispered, kneeling beside Max as she placed a small medal around his neck. Max's eyes met hers, filled with quiet understanding. He wasn't a hero because of a medal. He was a hero because he had loved, and that love had saved them both. As the days turned into weeks, Max's bond with Lucas only deepened. The baby, who had once been so small and fragile, now giggled as Max played gently around him. Rebecca watched with a smile, knowing that no matter what the future held, her family had something unbreakable between them. They had survived the storm both literally and figuratively, and in the end they had emerged stronger for it. And in Max's eyes there was only one thing that mattered now: keeping his family safe. His second chance had led him to them, and he would protect them for as long as he was able.